Hello and welcome to Analysing Avatar. We're here today to take a look at the episode The Revelation, which, what a revelation, eh, Chris? No sports in this one. That's a revelation for you.
What is that? Well, I mean, what is surely? It's more of a revolution than a revelation, isn't it? I suppose the revelation is, he can spoil as well. No, you describe the episode and then we'll go into it.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not?
I think the revelation, I think, is the thing you think it is, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, this is the episode where, at the start, it looks like it might be potentially a sports episode about raising some funds to get the team, because it turns out, to enter the tournament, they need, it was something like 30,000 yuans, which is apparently a lot of money in the world of Avatar, and they all separately go out to try and collect some cash to try and get the team into the tournament. So they've qualified, but they can't necessarily afford the entry fee. While doing that, Bolin is approached by a guy called... Wait, I wrote it down because it was too good. It was too good, Chris. Shady Shin, who...
I mean, it's just moments away from... If this show was British, he'd be called Dodgy Dave, wouldn't he?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly, 100%. So Shady Shin offers Bolin some sort of quote-unquote security work, and it turns out we reveal that the boys, having been orphaned for a long time and had to look after themselves for a long time, did have some minor dealings with the Triple Threat Triads back in the day, which makes sense, because it appears the Triple Threat Triads are one of many groups in the CC. They also reference the Red Monsoons and the Agni Kai, but clearly the Triple Threat Triads, their whole thing is that they have benders from each, benders from each sort of discipline on their side, whereas you've got to assume the Agni Kai is firebenders particularly, and the Red Monsoons probably waterbenders. No sign of an earthbending one. But anyway, Bolin gets wrapped up in that, but unfortunately is then kidnapped by a mysterious group, and after talking to essentially Steven Universe, we'll come back to that, it turns... Mako and Korra go on a search for Bolin, who's been kidnapped, and it leads them to the Equalists, who are holding a rally called The Revelation, where we reveal Amon, their leader. Not only does he hate benders, but he's actually got the power to take their bending away. Is it energy bending, Chris? Is it some other form of trick? We don't know, but let me tell you, everyone's real shook up about it, which is fair enough.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm. So
someone's been to see a giant Des Ex Machina sea turtle, haven't they?
How are you feeling, Chris?
Somebody's taken a visit to Chekhov's sea turtle to chat to them.
Chekhov's sea turtle. That doesn't work at all, but it's very funny.
I am joking. For those that don't remember, we won't get into it now. We had a whole discussion about whether the sea turtle thing was sort of set up or not in the Avatar finale. But I say it in jest. We concluded it was an amazing piece of television. So don't worry. Don't worry, peeps. Somewhere out there's someone that loves that sea turtle and hates The Last Jedi. Really angry at this podcast right now. They don't want any more to do with us. What do you mean, Steven Universe? Is the character voiced by
Zach Callison? Yes, he is.
Oh wow, awesome!
But very young Zach. This is obviously, I believe this is pre-Steven Universe. Well, actually, I could look that up. No, it's not. It's the same year. Wow. Literally the same year.
That's
2012.
Awesome.
Which, by the way, Chris, I think we're going to have to release some Steven Universe stuff this year, because it is the anniversary. 10 years this year.
2012?
Yeah, I think so.
But we're now in 2023, mate, so it's 11 years.
Oh, no, maybe it's 13. No, it's 2013. 2013. My bad. Okay, cool. So actually, this was a year before.
Right.
So yeah,
that's awesome.
So 2023 is when Steven Universe hits its 10-year anniversary in 2023. So we'll have to do something.
Yes, so we will do some...
we'll come back to that.
We will release some stuff.
So, maybe we'll finally go back and re-review the movie, because I know a lot of people weren't happy with our original review of the movie. Maybe that's what we do. We'll come back. I every now and then, Chris, I get a broken-hearted message from someone that's like, I love Steven University. I got into it. I was really excited. Couldn't wait to hear your thoughts on the movie. And I'm always just like, oh no. I know where this is going. We were not kind to the movie.
We weren't.
We loved that show, but that movie did not land right.
I don't think we were like too brutal.
No,
but
you
anyway.
weren't. I was. At one point, I said
Yeah.
it's like McDonald's. It'll fill you up for a minute, but there's nothing to it.
Jesus, God.
I
I do remember that. I remember I was more on side than you were.
Yes, you were. It's mostly my fault. So maybe we'll redo the movie. Anyway, different story.
But it doesn't even. It doesn't sound like it sounds like a man. Like it doesn't sound like a boy.
Wait,
like,
which
voicing
one?
that part.
No, he's the small child that's all like, I'll tell you where Bolin is. For money.
Oh, I thought he was the protester. Right, sorry, that makes way more sense.
No, he's sorry. Yeah, he's the small child.
Right, sorry. That makes way more sense now.
Wow, you thought he was the guy with the megaphone? That's clearly an adult man.
That's why I was very
Yeah, no
impressed.
wonder
I
you
was
were
like,
confused.
I was like, that kid's got some range.
Yeah, I was going to say, how talented is Zach Callison? Sounded like a 40-year-old man.
Right, that makes way more sense. Oh, cool. Oh, I think I did kind of recognise the voice then. Actually.
Yeah, so he's a small kid that they. So for anyone who doesn't remember the sequence, in Bolin goes to do this work, but then Mako's like, oh no, he's in trouble because he's off for the Triple Triads again. That's bad news for everyone. They not realizing the full extent of that, the problem of that yet, but still not great that he's gone off with the Triple Triads. So they're trying to track him down. And he goes to because Mako knows these streets, as it were. He knows exactly what kid to ask that might have the info. And there's this small kid that's like, yeah, I know where, I might have seen him, I might not have seen him. Having some trouble with my memory. Maybe if you could give me some money, I'll be able to tell you. And then he tells him. And then the kid, stops halfway through his story and holds out his hand again for more money. That kid is voiced by Zach Callison. Very, very, very well.
Ah, right. That makes way more sense.
Our good buddy Zach.
Yep, we met him. He was lovely. Very charming.
Mm-hmm. You can head over to the YouTube channel if you want to hear his interview, Zach. There you go. Not about this. We didn't ask him about his brief role on Legend of Korra.
No, we didn't think to do that.
No, we did not. Right, so
it would have been funny because we made a real, and it was so it was very genuine, but he was fundamentally at this point mainly promoting an album, and we both genuinely really really like that album. It's a great album. And then so Dan and I were making a real conscious effort to make sure that we talked about the album because we wanted to, and also there's a degree of playing the game. When someone's there to talk about a specific thing, you want to talk about that specific thing, and we were legitimately excited to. But it would have been really funny to be like to see if we get to just be like, oh man, I mean this album, it's got so many themes, manhood, in a way, boyhood. Speaking of boyhood, do you remember when you played that little boy on Legend of Korra? What was that like? Weave our way to it from the album.
I like it. I think we missed a trick not doing that. There you go.
Yeah, no, I regret it.
Mm.
Overall, so in general, this episode, you know what? I've got to stop repeating myself. But how cool is this sort of city aesthetic? With the scenes where they're the chase scenes in the city this week,
Yeah.
at the end and earlier on, and as they're exploring the city, I'm like, I haven't seen an animation that looks like this before. And I'm sure they exist, but this just looks so different to any other show we've reviewed for a podcast or reviewed on the podcast.
Right.
Just aesthetically and visually,
Yeah.
it's so engaging and interesting and unique, and I just really love that. How many sequel shows have you seen? Take House of Dragon, right? House of Dragon's awesome. I really like House of Dragons. Actually, if I'm choosing, I almost prefer it in a way. Although obviously it's only got one season versus Game of Thrones 8th.
Yes,
it hasn't quite had a chance.
There's
to
plenty of time for
way.
House of Dragon to fall off a cliff.
Season 8 it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But aesthetically, to the point where there was a montage on the Big Fat Quiz of the Year Which, for anyone confused by that, we're recording this in December, and that's an annual British TV sort of quiz show. And there was a montage of TV this year, and it featured a clip from House of Dragons. And Jess went, "Oh, I didn't realise Game of Thrones was this year. I thought that was like 2 years ago." And I was like, "It was. That was the House of Dragon." She was like, "Oh, that makes sense." I love that when watching this, I was like, "This doesn't feel like Avatar. It doesn't feel visually like Avatar, and it shouldn't necessarily,
right.
But in most cases it would. In House of Dragon it does feel like Game of Thrones. This feels like something different, and I know I've said that for 3 weeks in a row now, but I just think that's really, really impressive. And they really, made use of the visuals of like the city this year, this episode.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly impressive in that Avatar itself had that going for it when compared to the other children's television landscape. They've pulled that trick off twice in a way, because you watch Avatar, the original series, and you go, well, this is just like visually stunning. Like, what looks like this on kids' TV? What show has all this really interesting sort of sort of Asian culture inspired architecture, these really beautiful vistas, this sort of like very ancient feel to it. Like this, feels like a world that's been very lived in, but it also feels somehow like sort of old and ancient and sort of like it could be our world in the past. Just something about it that was just, and it was a mix of all these different cultures, and just again visually it just looked like nothing else we'd seen on television. And to pull that trick off twice, doing a sequel show and somehow finding a way to make it visually distinct from that, when you'd already found a way to make your show so visually unique, fascinating to succeed in doing that again. Even down to the character designs. The characters in this look like they fit alongside the characters of the world of Avatar, but yet they don't somehow. They do somehow look distinct and different, and they have a tone. And there's a sort of like, I don't know, it's just something about it. Maybe it's just because the characters in Last Airbender were primarily children, so they were sort of shorter and slightly stockier in build. Whereas these characters all feel very slender. They feel like they fill the frame in a different way. I'm not sure if that's... I've got to assume it's intentional, because everything else seems really well thought out and poured over. So I'm assuming that...
Yeah, I think there's definitely a conscious these are young adults, whereas, in Avatar they were young teenagers.
Right. So yeah, I'm genuinely really impressed with this show's aesthetic. I think it's done a really good job. And you're right, there's sort of the quote-unquote chase scene in the early parts of this episode were really good. The middle parts, I should say, this episode. And then of course we had the visuals themselves of the revelation, which I thought was a really cool... It has an almost like... I know some people see it as like a steampunk vibe, but like all the back of house for the revelation, all of like these... It was all like pipes and weird dank corridors, and then the actual place in which they were watching it, and then of course the visual itself of Amon taking the guy's bending away while he was like, what a clever choice. Have the guy... I think they did the same thing when they had Aang take away Ozai's bending, but like he was blasting out fire and watching it turn from blue to red to just evaporating, and then having him fall to the floor like that was such a powerful image. It's one of my favorite visuals from this entire show, and I think when I think about this show sometimes, that image pops into my head before pretty much anything else. It's such a cool, iconic piece of animation and design, and yeah, I think a lot of care and attention has gone into how this show looks and feels. And and again, I understand the people who are like, well, it feels different. I'm not a fan of that. I would have preferred it felt the same. Again, you're not wrong to feel that way. I don't personally agree with that, but that is a valid position to take. You wanted more of the same thing. What a shame this has not fulfilled that for you. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a fair thing to criticize the show for, because it wasn't trying to be that, but it is a fair thing to feel and use as a thing to be like, I didn't like it. Does that make sense? Because I think there's a difference between sitting down and saying, this wasn't for me, and this is bad. Right? And I think people get very confused at those two things quite often. Like, those people who are disappointed this show isn't just Avatar are right to feel that way, but they are wrong to think that's a valid criticism of the show. If you want to criticize the show's storytelling choices, or you want to criticize the specific elements of the choices of design, you don't like that they chose to make it a city, you don't like how they chose to modernize it, you can. That's not like a criticism of like the structure. They've successfully achieved the thing they wanted to achieve. You just don't like that thing, and that's the difference between like a criticism and a taste thing, you know, because they've executed it very well. So it's like, yeah, it might not be to your taste, but they've achieved that. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, Chris. So how did you feel about this episode, sort of in a more story sense? We went straight to like the visuals and the aesthetic. What did you think? Because obviously you were probably expecting another, an episode sort of leaning towards the sports stuff. So was this a surprise? How did you feel?
I don't really know what I was expecting, to be fair. I guess if I was a betting man, I would have maybe picked the sports stuff, and it's certainly, it starts as this is going to be a romp about raising money, and how are they going to raise the money, and it becomes something very different, which I love. I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was good to get bonding between Korra and not Bolan, the other guy,
Mako.
I'm going to call him Mark because of Mark Bolan, I think. I'm just going to automatically get that wrong.
There's Mako and Bolan. Yes, I can see how.
I
can see
not
that's
even
going to be a problem.
Bolan.
Yes.
So I thought their chemistry is great, and it was great to see them do stuff. I thought Tenzin was a bit relaxed, like, oh, there you are. Did you find your friend? I'm like, by my count, she's been gone like 2 days now.
Right.
And you're just like, oh, did you find him? Like, is that all you require? I'm off looking for someone. Like, okay, I'll see you in 2 days then, I guess. Bizarre. So that made me chuckle.
Yeah, I guess my only assumption, and this is a bit fansplaining because the episode doesn't cover it, but my assumption is when she told Tenzin, it wasn't a desperate situation because at that point she didn't yet know that he was with the triple threats. So she just said, "Oh yeah, we're just trying to. Our friend Bolin's just gone wandering. We're gonna go look for him." Okay, no problem. Like it probably was a casual thing. It was only once they spoke to that small child that they became concerned he was in trouble. And at that point, she never goes back to the island to tell Tenzin, oh no, this is actually a serious situation. So presumably Tenzin's information is, Tenzin's information is just, one of their friends has gone wandering.
He still surely should have expected her to come back at least once within 2 days to like sleep or something.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I thought again, all the themes of, right, well, let's take away bending for everyone. I assumed it was energy bending, like Aang did, to answer that point, in terms of what's going on. I love, all joking aside, I love that it does add a bit more weight to me. Because I did, again, I don't want to cover old ground, but I did feel it was a bit like out of left field, that resolution in the finale of Avatar. The fact that that's now being explored more and they're adding more depth to that. And, the resolution of Avatar has become the threat of Korra. I think that's very, very clever.
Yes, it is.
So I really like that. So yeah, I was. I had a great ride watching this episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it is a clever one, and I think particularly, the idea of the equalists is pretty genius actually, because this is the show sort of observing a criticism about itself, and that is, or about its world, I should say, because that is the truth, isn't it? Is the world of Avatar is a sort of system where non-benders are second-class citizens. Whether by design or not, whether just by accident, all the benders get to be, revered and get to do cool stuff, and all of the rest of the muggles, as it were, it's just like, off you go. Like, I don't know, like run a tea shop. Like, you don't... Like, all the people in power, all the people making decisions everywhere in this society are benders, and that is, they've observed correctly a thing that is actually in a real world setting would be a massive problem, right? So I think what's clever about this is we've said this many times on our other podcasts, but this is the first time this will be relevant, I think, to Avatar. The best villain is one who's technically right. Right? A villain that you go, well, yes, you've correctly observed the problem. Your solution and methodology are making you the villain in this scenario. But the thing you're actually trying to resolve, correct. That is an issue. A clean sort of common and popularly accepted example I can pull would be Killmonger from Black Panther. He's correct what he's saying in that movie. The people of for those who don't remember the plot of that movie, I'll very briefly just the people of Wakanda have the ability to help more than they are doing the rest of the world, and to maintain their secrecy, they're choosing not to, and that is sort of by his view, and I think it makes sense that I agree with that. It's inaction is causing suffering, and they're doing it for selfish reasons. The inaction. So I found that very interesting. Because that's like he's technically correct that maybe there's more they could do for their fellow man, and in this society is skewed heavily to the bending. They're sort of the elite of this world, and it makes sense that some people in a big city like this would start to gather together and go, is that right? And then to give the leader of that the power to take away someone's bending. That's pretty clever.
It's very clever.
Yeah, it is. How are you feeling about Amon as a villain otherwise? Like, are you getting any... I mean, he's got, obviously, spooky masked man. We hear his backstory in this episode, actually. His backstory is that basically a bender... I think he's killed his mother, killed his family. I can't remember the exact wording. Let me look it up. I'll pull up the script.
Yeah, I was trying to do the maths on the time frames of that, if I'm honest. I was like, could that be someone we've seen? And I was like, no, presumably not from Avatar. I think it will be, it will be someone, whether someone from Avatar or someone that we've, seen or will see in Korra. But I think, you don't have a villain behind a mask and then reveal them to be, Derek, new character. I don't know where Derek, new character came from, but do you know what I mean? So I fully think they're going to be someone. I think it's really great because they're not, it's a very...
Derek, new character is my favourite character now.
It's a very world-specific threat, which, again, is the best kind of villains and threats. It's not when it's, I'm gonna take over the world. It's when it's I'm going to tear the Avengers apart. Even though let's be honest, Zemo's plan in Civil War was a bit complicated and had a lot of steps that could have easily fallen. But you know what I mean? Like Killmonger, again, great example. Killmonger's not trying to take over the world for the sake of taking over the world. Killmonger's trying to fuck things up for Wakanda. So it inherently becomes a more personal story. And this notion of, we're not chasing a villain. Not that they did this well in Avatar as well, obviously. But, we're not trying to stop a villain's ghastly scheme of the week. We're trying to stop a villain that's doing something very specific and personal to this world that's going to greatly affect our heroes and the legacy of our heroes from Avatar.
Right.
So I think he's a great villain, and I love. I don't know how you stretch it out. Like I don't know how it doesn't become a bit broader. But I'm excited to see, and based on the fact that this episode, the initial problem with this episode, and I could see someone saying this is a criticism. I reserve judgment for that as to whether it comes back or not. But this episode starts out with you've got to find this money plot. We don't resolve that plot. Like, I love the notion that some of this stuff is going to be quite serial as opposed to story of the week. Now, I will criticize it if we don't revisit that. If, that money's never mentioned again, I'll be like, well, how'd they get the money? And couldn't you have found something else to set them off on this adventure? But I don't feel like it's going to be that. I feel like the villain and the show are going to be, like I say, very, very serial, very arc-driven. And I think that's great. And I love how personal and specific to the world the threat of Anon is.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about Amon specifically as well, is that he presents a real problem for Korra, in that, or anyone really who wants to tackle him, is that if they attack him directly, they sort of prove him right.
Well, and they run the risk of getting their powers taken away.
Well, that too, but like, let's say there's a really cocky bender out there who's absolutely convinced that they could take him down, right? And they do. Then Amon just goes, well, here we go, being oppressed again by the bending elite, and it backs his point up. It's a villain that you have to tackle physically and politically. And that presents a new problem that we haven't had dealt with in the show previously. To come back to your other point as well, the money plot. Yes, exactly right. Like, it doesn't matter that that's not necessarily resolved in this episode, assuming that we're sort of going for a serialized approach here, more so than we did with Avatar. Because Avatar had its overarching plots, but any small plots that were begun were always ended within the episode they were begun in, unless it was a two-parter specifically. But the idea that this show plot threads might pop up in small ways, but then become more relevant later, like, you know, the very first introduction to the Equalists we had was a brief thing in the first episode that was ignored completely in the second, but came back here in the third. So, you know, excuse me. I should clarify in case someone's jumped in on this one specifically. Recovering from COVID, lots of coughing. Hopefully I've cut out as much of them as possible if I've been clever enough to die while Chris is talking. And there was one point earlier when I died really badly, and I think I heard Chris falter because I was coughing so much, like he was debating whether to stop talking to ask me if I was alive.
Yeah. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's going to come across on my mic.
Yeah. Well, I'll cut my sound of it. No one has to hear that.
You're ill and you're powering through like a champ. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I thought you meant like literally die then, and I was like, Dan, if you die, I don't have the editing capabilities you do, mate. Like, it's just not airing. Like, I'm not gonna be like, here's 3 episodes of that. Here's 3 episodes of Korra before Dan died.
I genuinely fear, Chris, I'm hit by a bus, and my last thought is, fuck, I didn't need to bother recording those last 10 podcasts with Chris, because they'll never see the light of day.
I would look up. I'd make sure I kept paying for the podcast to still be out there and available. I wouldn't let it just like fade off of all the.
Yeah, but the 10 episodes that we'd recorded, because we record these in roughly about we're about 10 weeks ahead release wise.
No, I try and find a way to make sure the rewind reviews go up, but no, I wouldn't put up 3 episodes of an unfinished podcast.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm just, I've put all this work in, Chris. I fought through during COVID.
Well, don't die, Dan. Like, that would be my advice. Otherwise, I'll have to do a podcast with Derek New character.
Yeah, but at first you won't know that till he is, because he'll be wearing a mask.
Yeah. And then episode 10, it will be apparent that it's you. You're like, I didn't die.
Yeah, but then that wouldn't be Derek New character, would it? That'd be a good reveal.
I wonder how Derek New character had the logins.
That would be so Scooby-Doo, to have the guy in the mask be the one other character from the show.
Yeah. That would be.
Oh, look, it's that one other guy we met this week. Shocking.
Yeah, I assume we're going to meet someone at some point and they'll turn out to be Anon. But, yeah.
Sure. Excuse me. Well, that'll be a harder one to cut out, unless I come in here. So bringing us back on track, Chris. Because we're just briefly, like, obviously, like, everyone, including myself, really hopes you don't die, Dan. Just so you know. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I also hope I don't die, but only because.
There you go.
Only because of the podcast, like, and knowing you wouldn't put up all the episodes that we've recorded.
Yeah.
The idea, because
and
it's not even that I like care about like a legacy or anything like that. I literally just don't like the idea that I recorded these for no reason. That is purely it.
Like I say, then we got to get through to the end of the season.
I am really scared actually because we talked about this the other day. We were joking, like I think it was on either on Rewind Reviews or this, and we talked about how at some point your schedule is going to be impractical for you as a man who at some point is going to want children. So I was like, well, it's okay. Once the Korra's done, we'll just lower it down. We'll do less podcasts. That's a good idea. Stick with MBS and the odd series of Rewind Reviews that we can sort of build up very slowly over time. So there's not a weekly podcast. And then I was like, so that's happy. I'm happy with that. That's a good idea. We'll wind it down sort of from that point. And then I was like looking at a news website, and it was like 3 more series of Avatar in the works, being developed at the moment, including a series about a new earthbending Avatar. And then it was like, I was like, oh crap, it's like 3 movies. I'm like, oh shit. And then I'm like, oh yeah, and there's the Netflix live action show too. And then I'm like, oh, and then there's all the comics.
I think 2 things. One, I still, that was your plan. My plan was just to be a bad father, which is, still an option on the table. 2, I love that it always comes down to my future plans. You've got some potential plans that could also cause us scheduling difficulties at the very least.
Yes, that is also true.
We've had 10 years of life and managed to make it work, so I think we'd be all right. I don't think we need to. Don't worry.
Man, I'm thinking long term. Let's
get you over COVID, and then
we're grumpy old men. We're grumpy old men. I like the idea that we'll still be doing this at 40, though. That's fun.
I feel like that just makes me feel like. Do you remember that scene in Love Actually where Bill Nighy's talking to his roadie or his manager, and he's like, "It turns out you were the love of my life." I just got visions of me and you at 80 doing a podcast, lamenting.
No listeners.
Lamenting things. Yeah, just no listeners. Not even like we're like the only podcast still posting on Spotify at that point. Like everyone else has moved on to new technology.
Yeah, we've still not upgraded our mics. We're still using these.
We're like we did it. We did podcasting before it was popular and after it was popular.
We rode that wave into the ground, baby. All right.
Anyway,
so let's get back to this. It's an interesting episode because I think structurally it's actually really simple because it is the revelation, it's the reveal, right? It's a sequence of events that leads to Korra and Mako being at that place. There is a lot of tension to it. I do think you genuinely think Bullen could be in real trouble. You don't necessarily think he'll have his bending taken away, even once they reveal
no
that Amon can do that. But there's a bunch of action. There's a good old sort of mystery to this episode working out. I mean, I didn't love the simplicity of, if you put a couple of these different what do they call it, flyers together, it makes a map. That's pretty dumb. That's just pretty dumb.
Yeah, because who's taken 4 versions of a flyer? How do you make sure that they're 4 versions with a different back? Logistically was a pain. Tell you what I did like, though, the twist. Like, I thought it was going to be, he doesn't know whether he wants to do the bad, shady stuff, but he does do the shady stuff, but he gets mixed up in this big thing. That twist of, oh, no, actually, he's been kidnapped. And he's, it's a fate far worse than that. I thought that was...
I've always thought that was a bit interesting, because my assumption is because Amon has kidnapped the Triple Threat Triads, and very clever as well, they're a group of benders that are essentially bullying regular folk, right? So... Shady Shin is a member of the Triple Threat Triads and did genuinely try, it seems, to coax Bullen into work. It's just that then they immediately got kidnapped as members of the Triple Threat Triads by Amon's people, and it's just sort of almost like wrong place, wrong time. Like it's a real sequence of events that's like full of coincidences. Like any other given day, Bullen would not have been present to be in that, and that's like, you could argue that's maybe a coincidence too many, but it works pretty well, I think. Like, you don't at any point buy the reality of that sequence of events that leads Korra to Amon. And if anything, I really like I like Amon's ability to just see the opportunity in a situation. Like, I wanted people to know what I can do. the person who's going to shout about it the loudest and probably be listened to has just witnessed it. Like, let her go, because actually, she's going to help me achieve my goal better than anyone else who I've invited here tonight.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good. But yeah, but I this easily could have been that story you described. Bolin goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Moral quandary. But we've seen that before. I don't think that's as interesting as what we got, if I'm being honest.
No, not at all. No, that's what I'm saying. And I love that twist on it and how it veered into that instead. I thought that was really clever.
Two other things I want to ask you about. First of all, we brushed past it, Chris. We skirted against it, but we didn't actually go into it. I've got Amon's exact backstory from his speech here. My quest for equality began years ago when I was a boy. My family and I lived on a small farm. We weren't rich, and none of us were benders. This made us very easy targets for firebenders who extorted my father. One day, my father confronted this man, but when he did, the firebender took my family from me, and then he took my face. How are we feeling about that as a backstory?
Yeah, I think it's good. I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if they have taken his face. So I think that might be a lie.
My first thought when I saw that, Chris, the first time was, "Do you want to hear how I got these scars?"
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
It was very much those vibes. So, sorry, I've heard the word vibe so much over the last few weeks, and I'm like, now I've become, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, Dan, don't you? To give another Dark Knight quote. But yes, I absolutely don't necessarily buy it, but it was a good one. It got the crowd worked up. It did what it was supposed to do.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the Equalists as a group, beyond Amon specifically. I really liked two things about them. First of all, I like their use of technology. Like, they're using the technology to sort of even the playing fields a bit with the benders. So they've got, like, they can electrocute you, and they've got these suits that do all these weird things. But they also have learnt chi blocking, the technique Ty Lee used.
Another great example of like an element of Avatar that we saw explored a little bit. The world's evolved. The evolution of that it just makes me go, what else are we going to see evolutions of in this show? I think it's great. I think it's really logical, great storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just makes it. Nadia pointed out a lot of the bending techniques that were, specialist or hard to do or only done by a couple of real experts back in the day now seem to be a lot more common. We've got a whole police force of people doing, the advanced earthbending moves of metal bending, and then we've got this whole group of people that have learnt chi blocking. And we've got another guy in Amon who seemingly can do energy bending, which is previously only been known to be done by an avatar, Aang specifically, the most recent example. So it's very interesting to see how skill sets are evolving really thoroughly too. And it's almost, this is going to sound stupid, but bear with me 1 second. It's almost like what happened with mixed martial arts, where when it started, it was this weird, horrible, gimmicky, what would happen if a kickboxer fought a sumo wrestler? What would happen if a boxer fought a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy? And the answer is the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy would drag him to the ground, bend his arm in a way that would make him scream, and then the match would be over. Royce Gracie won all the first UFC events because boxing can't help you against Brazilian jiu-jitsu because they will just drag you to the ground and snap your arm. That is what that does. You cannot defend that with punching. So then the boxing guys started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu defense. And the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys started learning boxing defense. And all of a sudden, this art form evolved that was a mixture of all of them. And the skill set of a modern MMA fighter is vastly evolved. They know all sorts of disciplines now. And it's way more common. The first MMA guys to really get a good sense of all of the martial arts that were occurring in mixed martial arts did very, very well over the people that favoured one specific style. Now, obviously, in the world of Avatar, people can't also learn earthbending and waterbending, but a huge number of them...
Apart from the Avatar, obviously.
Apart from the Avatar, obviously. But in terms of the stylistic of the sort of the average benders in the world, a lot of them have learnt the advanced techniques. It's way more common to find people who have mastered metal bending. And that is a fascinating development for the world of Avatar. To show that, like, people on average are achieving stuff that was uncommon years before.
But it's also so logical, isn't it? Like, it's evolution. Do you know what I mean? As well as, like, you know, you could apply what you've just said to technology as well. You know, when computers first exist, you know, multi-millionaires had them. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and it was just them, or they were these big clunky things in high corporate office blocks, and now everyone's got them in there, literally in their pocket, you know. And it's that's the way things evolve sometimes, and it makes for a fascinating world, but also, you know, again, you've got to give them credit for setting this show in an evolved world. Let's see what the promise at the end of Avatar looks like in reality. Which is always, you know, a more interesting subject than let's do the same thing again, you know?
Yeah. Agreed. How did you feel about Korra in this episode? Because I must admit, I slightly bumped up against her judgmental, and I know it's her character, and this is the arc she's going on. She's a little judgy in this episode, though. Oh, how could you have possibly worked with the Triads? It's like, Korra, you said it earlier this episode. You've always been looked after. You've always had everything provided as the Avatar. Maybe a little bit check privilege, because Mako and Bolin did not have your advantages. They had to resort to some unfortunate things. Doesn't mean they enjoyed it. Doesn't mean it was right. But this weird black and white morality scale you have falls apart when people are starving. So how did you feel about that? Because I found that to be quite judgmental from Korra. And a little insensitive in the first part of the episode where she's like, entry fee? I don't have money. I've never had money. Everything's just been given to me.
Yeah, it didn't. I mean, it didn't strike me as anything, like we talked about last week, though, just realistic for the world she's grown up in. Like, I think they get away with it because I know it's not her intention. I know it's not her intention to be that. She just naturally is because of her circumstance. Mm-hmm. So I didn't bump up against it that much, I think, for that reason. But also it's just not something, you know, I think on a rewatch you notice those details more than perhaps on an initial viewing. Which I think is part of it as well.
Yeah, and I think our defense from last week is still valid as well, which is that she's on a character arc. You know, she's come into this. It is literally the point of her character that she's been sheltered too much, and she's naive and not streetwise and not, you know, aware. And if anything, actually having her feel that way and be forced to reckon with that by having two people that she knows are good people have been in that situation might make her a little bit more empathetic the next time she comes across a triple threat triad. You know,
and call her out on it as well. You know.
What's that, sorry?
And call her out on it as well. Like, they can call her out on that, and they do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, when I say bumped up against it, I would not say as a criticism of the episode. I just meant, like, I did twice go, oh, Korra.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, so yeah, I think I kind of, on this watch, because we're watching it with a bit more of a critical eye, I'm definitely noticing a little bit more with Korra specifically, like personality stuff.
But I think that's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Are you noticing it in a, that's probably that, I can see that's what annoys some people, or are you noticing it in a, that's annoying me? And I don't think, you know, yet there's any answer to that. We have to see how that evolves. But I think that's an interesting thing to take note of, whether it's you identifying what people have said is the problem, or whether you're identifying it as a problem for you.
Yeah, well, I think at the moment I'm identifying it as what other people have said as the problem, because my assumption, and this is the first time I've ever really tracked it across the show with the critical eye, Korra's arc. Because if, by the end of the show, Korra is a more empathetic, understanding, patient Avatar, well, that's her journey then, right? That's intense.
Yeah,
That's not an annoying character. That's a character with flaws learning to be better. And that's storytelling. That's what Aang went through. By the end of the series, Aang was no longer the annoying, obnoxious, trying to avoid his responsibility child he was at the start of the show. He was an adult that understood what his responsibilities were and accepted them gracefully and did right by the rest of the world and was less selfish. If by the end of the show Korra is less naive, more understanding, less stubborn, less bratty, more willing to accept the thoughts of others, things like that, all that stuff that people have criticized, well, then that's just called a character arc. That's not you can't criticize the show for that. So it will depend on what we see going forward. But my memory of it is that is what we get. So we'll have to see. And again, I said this last week. Could be a controversial thought, but I do wonder how much of this is to do with the character's gender. Are certain groups of vocal internet people more likely to criticize these behaviors in a female character than in a male one? Because
I would say history would suggest yes.
Yeah, I feel there's a truth to that. I don't know if that's obviously not going to be 100% of it. I'm sure there are people out there who are female that feel the same way about Korra, but I would put money on a vast majority of them being guys. If I was guessing, if I was putting my money on it, that's where I'd be putting my money. If I'm being honest with you, Chris. So yeah, I'm not sure those criticisms are necessarily valid, but because again, it seems designed. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but it would be interesting to track how,
it's like criticizing a comedy for trying to do jokes. It's like,
But I think it will be very interesting to track how much of it, whether observation becomes irritation, on your part.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I'm certainly noticing it more. I'm more aware of it going into this review, because I'm aware of what these shows' criticisms are, and I've never really watched it with an eye to, because I don't pay those sort of criticisms very much mind in my general life. I always enjoyed Korra. Whenever I've rewatched it, I've watched it just and enjoyed taking it in. It's also a show where it's interesting because it's another show where like my favorite character of the show is not introduced until I think the second season. So we have another tough situation. But not not quite a main character and part of the gang in the same way. But my favorite character of Korra doesn't come into it till season 2, which is very fun. Right. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, so it's a show I always watch for joy purposes. I've never really sat down and watched it thinking about what those common criticisms of it are specifically and looking for counters.
Have you watched it every time you've rewatched Avatar?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think so. But I think I've still seen Avatar more because I think I rewatched Avatar a time or two before Korra started.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. But I'm basically saying, do you always go all the way through is the question, I guess.
I think I've rewatched Avatar since Korra finished. I think I've rewatched Avatar twice, and I think both times I did Korra straight after. Now, if we're including this podcast, there was a really big gap, obviously, between the two. That's my third rewatch, I guess. But yeah, I've rewatched it twice since Korra ended, and both times I watched Korra straight after.
Cool. So you've seen Korra. This will be your fourth time watching Korra, essentially.
Yeah, the original viewing, the two subsequent ones, and then this. Yeah, you're exactly right. This will be roughly my fourth time. I assume as well I've dipped in and watched random episodes and stuff in the past as well, because I love the world of this show, and I've definitely over the years been like, I really got the urge to watch like this episode, and I've done that, and I've jumped into an episode or two of Avatar, and I've definitely jumped into an episode or two of Korra, although rarely first season. I was thinking about that the other day. I don't think about the first season of the show as much as the other seasons, which is interesting.
Maybe that's a reflection of your favourite character.
Yes, who is a lot more present in the subsequent seasons by being present, by nature of being in the show.
By nature of being in the show, that makes sense.
Shall we move on, Chris? Have you got any other notes, or do you want to get into the triv? How exciting!
No, I haven't got any other notes. So unless you do, let's triv it up.
I'm gonna give you some trivia. The image on the invitation to the rally bears a similarity to realized communist propaganda posters from Stalinist Russia, with Ammon in the place of Joseph Stalin. I appreciate real world connections, and I appreciate borrowing design elements from the real world. You know, when it comes to the architecture and the culture and things like that, I could have done without Stalinist Russia propaganda. I get it. You were trying to make it look culty, communisty, like you're trying to make it look like propaganda. So to borrow from propaganda, I guess, is understandable. But maybe that probably not needed. You probably could have just designed you probably just could have designed a propaganda poster of your own and made it look propaganda-y without.
Yeah, because that's a classic. Like, who's that decision for? Like, the main audience for this show is not going to be like, no, that's evoking of Stalin.
Yeah, so... yeah. I remember those posters. Yeah. My childhood. Yeah. So I don't know what. Because I think it would have. You could have put that imagery across without borrowing from our world's real.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I think, but I'm a little bit neutral on that. If I'm being honest with you, I don't particularly care for it, but I also don't particularly care about it. Like it doesn't affect anything, and the average person watching the episode wouldn't know that. So, I guess it's an irrelevant point. But anyway, excuse me. Amon's evasive maneuvers when battling Lightning Bolt Zolt, one of the leaders of the Triple Threat Triads, resembles the weaving patterns presented in the Camelephant Strut, which is a dance that Aang performs in the headband.
Oh, nice.
So in the headband, Aang does a bunch of dances that he's learned from around the world, one being the Camelephant Strut, and it resembles that for some reason. I don't think there's any real reason for that. I don't think that's supposed to be a hint of anything. I just think it just happens to be a similar maneuver.
A quick side note on that, because we didn't talk about it. Although he was only briefly there, and obviously has lost his powers, Lightning Bolt Zolt, I thought was very brilliantly realised. You kind of like, you only got a glimpse of him, but you knew exactly what type of thug and villain he was.
Right.
Like, I thought that he was it felt like a very complete character. Who, like, executed some cool powers as well. And some, I know obviously we've seen firebending become lightning before, but yeah, you absolutely got how he was the leader of that organization.
Yeah, and actually, while we're on that, security work that they offer Bolin and make Mako working at the power plant, producing lightning to just power the city. That makes a lot of sense, and also actually works as an interesting counterpoint to Amon, because it means some benders just work a regular job in a power plant.
Yeah, for sure.
Just that. So that's an interesting. Mako and Bolin actually represent one of the ways in which Amon is wrong. He's right in that the government and the structure of the society seems very, there were 4 people on the council. That's the next. I think that's in the next episode. There are 4 people on the council we see in the next episode that make decisions in Republic City, and they represent different bending. They don't represent. There's no non-bender on that council, and that is a problem. But here we see Mako working at a power plant, which I think is just really good. And also, again, lightning. Mako's just doing lightning. Lightning is a way more common thing now. That was like a really exclusive trick that firebenders who are really, really talented could do in the era of Aang. But now is like commonplace.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's that evolution is so clever.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and I do think as well it makes a lot of sense that benders would just be in demand by gangs. Like Shady Shin being like, Bolin, look, you're an earthbender. Come give us a hand. And while we're on that, by the way, Bolin's "What? I'm a growing boy" line makes me laugh every time. I didn't give that a credit.
Yeah.
I just remembered that.
Was very funny.
Anyway, where are we? So the episode originally had another scene in Republic City, in the park, after Korra, Mako, and Bolin escape the Equalists, where they sort of got together again, and Korra got to be like happy and get the win of seeing the brothers reunited. But the scene was actually cut because they wanted to maintain emotional consistency for Korra, going from seeing what Amon could do to her conversation with Tenzin, where she's still stressed and worried and in that place, giving her that happy moment between the two might have muddled things, they felt. So that's why they removed it. I think that's right.
There's a moment between the two, isn't there, where she's like, she's got that sort of badass, I wouldn't rule us out just yet thing, which is great.
Yeah, but I think there was moment of like specifically focused on the brothers reuniting and Korra having gotten a victory in the face of defeat. This is an interesting one. The revelation flyers containing the secret location of the rally itself were inspired by Bri-Bri's participation in rave culture while at university. Bri-Bri, our code name on this podcast for Brian Kinitzko, who's one of the creators of the show. I love that he was like a big raver at uni, and they used to hand out flyers with secret locations on it. That's adorable.
Big fan of that, Bri-Bri. Bri-Bri's origins, big fan.
Yeah, enjoyed that. Thought that was fun. There were originally plans to have a running joke from Avatar return in this episode. Chris, do you remember Foaming Mouth Guy?
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah.
Whenever Aang and the gang would show up somewhere, I think it was Kyoshi Village or whatever, there was the guy that would just like foam at the mouth, and then he would like run out of steam and then like fall over or something. They were going to have Foaming Mouth Girl at the rally, who was foaming mouthed over Amon. But the plan was apparently scrapped because the creators felt it undermined the creepiness of the event. The character is apparently still present, but does not act unusually.
I never mind that. I just think it's a step too far. Like, I don't want to sit on this podcast and have a 5-minute discussion about whether Foaming Mouth Girl is related to Foaming Mouth Guy.
I would not have had that conversation. I would have been like, it would have just been, oh, that's a fun little nod. Would have been how I would have seen it, but yes, understood.
Fair enough.
During the Harry Potter movies, Daniel Radcliffe went through 160 pairs of glasses. Yes, Chris, I'm still doing it. Suck it. Originally, the plot for this episode was slightly different. Hasuk, who was the Fire Ferret's original waterbender, who, if you remember rightly, disappeared in the last episode, you assume he just quit the team, because the last thing we'd seen him do was have a fight with Mako and Bolin. The idea was going to be revealed that he'd been captured as one of Amon's henchmen. By one of Amon's henchmen. So that Korra, Mako, and Bolin were actually going after him to save him. It was later shifted so the story would be about saving Bolin, because they thought that the audience would have more connection to Bolin and be more invested in it that way.
Yeah, I think there's also a complication of like what happens when they find him. Does he get back on the team? Does he go, oh no, it should be you? Like, yeah, it's not as emotive and it's clunkier. I think that way. I'm glad they changed it.
Right. I see the thinking though. Excuse me. I will not be able to cut that cough out. That one came right out of the middle of the sentence. Thank you, throat. I'm going to have so much fun editing these. Oh, boy. The audio bit's usually the easiest, Chris, because we've learnt to self-edit over the years. You know.
Yeah, no.
People think we go on a lot of tangents. Oh, man. You should hear the earliest podcast we did before I took out shit. But we don't do that anymore.
We're recording it. It sounds like you've got a can, I've got a can, and we've got a bit of a string. And we're just trying to, we've just taken the audio from the string and put it online.
Well, no, because if you remember rightly, I had a reasonably good mic, and you were connecting through like the internet, and I was recording your sound on my laptop through your shitty laptop speaker. So I sounded okay, not as clear as this because we didn't have this mic yet, but I sounded like audible, like like I'd recorded it on a middling microphone, and you sounded like you were at the bottom of a well. It's amazing.
Because not only did we have to contend with my microphone, but then also like it was so dependent on your internet speed or capability, or like, do you know what I mean? So it was two crosses.
It was bad. It was bad. But you know what though? I always think it's best when you're going to start something like this, Chris. Which, let's be honest, it's a hobby, to test it out first before you invest money in it. I don't want to be the guy, I've said this before, I've said it again, I'll say it again, I don't want to be the guy with like a 300 quid set of golf clubs rusting in an attic, right? That I've never used or used once and got bored of. Like when I got into playing the ukulele, Chris, I bought the cheapest, plasticiest, crappiest ukulele I could find. Decided if I'm still playing this in several months' time, I will invest in a good one, and that's what I did. It's exactly what I did. And if I hadn't kept doing it, no harm, no foul. I've not wasted 150 quid on a fancy ukulele that's going to sit there and rot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I stand by our choice to use shit mics for the start of this, because I think if we hadn't carried on doing it, we'd have been grateful for not investing hundreds of pounds into microphones. We don't like. It's not fun to pay out for now. We definitely wouldn't have enjoyed that at the time.
Yeah, and back then we didn't have the 15 listeners we've got now, so
exactly.
It's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Final piece of trivia: Korra and Mako's bickering and tension throughout the episode is deliberately a hark back to the romantic relationships depicted in 1940s era films, namely the ones between actors Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Or starring actors.
There we go.
Starring those actors. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So how are we feeling about that element? Very quickly before we wrap up. Are we feeling there's still? Are you still feeling we're destined for love triangles? You worried about that?
Yeah. Oh, even more so. We got them bonding. Mm-hmm. We got bowling away while they bond and look for him. And there are moments she said something, I can't remember what, and he had a wry smile. Yeah, man. And obviously her nervousness as well, and the kids being like, "Oh, is this the one that drives you crazy? But is it like drives you crazy in a good way or a bad way?" Like, we're absolutely heading for Love Triangle City. And every time we talk about it, I'm going to sing the theme tune to Dawson's Creek.
I honestly, Chris,
I don't want to wait.
I think
for our lives to be over.
Nadia overheard part of our conversation yesterday when we recorded the last episode and was like, if Chris doesn't like love triangles, this show is going to be a problem. Nadia and I tried to draw this show's love triangle, and it was some sort of love rhombus.
We'll see. We'll see how it unfolds. I think you can do them well. I'm just saying, I don't think I've ever seen anything aimed at young adults, children. You know what I mean? I don't think I've ever seen a piece of kids media that's done a love triangle well. Comment below if you disagree, and that's fine. I'm happy to be proven wrong. There's probably many I've not seen, but yeah. Could it be like there were a lot of incredible nuances in Team Jacob or Team Edward? Is it?
Yeah, might be a love trapezoid.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
It's a different shape. A more complicated shape.
A trapezoid? I've never heard of that in my life.
You must have done. They did that in school. Trapezoid. It's like a maybe an island. It's like a slightly misshapen rectangle. It sort of goes out into a point at one end.
Sorry, I'm really proud of that joke, and I think it went unnoticed. But anyway,
I didn't catch it. Sorry. Go on.
You said you must have done that in school, and I went, not in Ireland, maybe in Ireland or something.
Oh, I see. Anyway. Very good. Well, that's a joke just for us, Chris, because I don't think our listeners know that I went to school in Ireland.
Well, if they listen to everything, they'll know that. We talked about that on Rewind Reviews and Nothing for Static. Okay. Yeah, because we talked about it loads.
Okay.
We talked about We talked about. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've talked about what are the zigzag equipment? Is it Zig and Zag or whatever those puppets?
Oh
or
yeah,
equivalents
Zig and Zag. And then there was Dustin in the Sock Monster.
Yeah, I think you've talked about Dustin and the Sock Monster more than Nadia. Like
Dustin and Socky the Sock Monster. Yeah, that's right. So there's a rhombus, which is like a sort of like angled square. And then there's a trapezoid. I made a joke about the rhombus. You ignored that. And then I made the trapezoid joke. And you the trapezoid is like again, it's sort of a misshapen rectangle.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Anyway, take us home, Dan, before we talk about shapes anymore.
Wait, I need a second. I tell you what I'm going to do before I go into giving us exit. I'm going to give a final thought, Chris, to give me a second to compose myself. Is that okay? I think it's important that we all remember that no matter what happens in the world, Chris, you can learn chi blocking, you can get fancy suits, You do all the things you want to try and create a more equal society, Chris. But what you can't do is chi block away a polar bear dog.
It's true. That's true. And I love
That's what we learned this week.
I don't know the name of the other animal, of Bolin's animal, but I loved...
Pabu?
Pabu. I loved Pabu replicating the roar. I thought that was brilliant.
Yes, that I forgot about that. Pabu is adorable. I love Pabu. He's a fire ferret. He's the mascot of the team, and he is adorable. Right, cool. So let's do. That was me just getting myself back into podcast mode, Chris, from whatever weird rhombus conversation we were having. I've done it with a Jerry's final thought. So there you go.
There we go.
So thanks everyone for listening so much. You can get us in lots of different places. If you wish to support us, you can do so financially over on our Patreon, patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, where you can give as little as $1 a month and get access to episodes of this podcast 1 week ahead of their usual iTunes and YouTube release. Of course, you can just keep listening on, Spotify, iTunes, and all the places you normally listen. But the other way you can support us is by liking the podcast or reviewing the podcast on your platform of choice. That tells them you like what you're hearing, and then it makes the algorithm, TM, more likely to tell other people. The other thing you can do is tell a friend, or the easiest thing you can do is just to keep listening. Actually, no, the easiest thing you can do is just to stop listening. You're welcome to do that too. But the easiest thing you can do to support us is just to keep listening. That's also lovely, and we appreciate that. You can comment in a few different ways. We've got the YouTube channel where episodes of this go up. You can put the comment on the specific episode that the comment you have is relevant to. So that's Nothing But Static UK on YouTube, so youtube.com/nothingbutstatic UK. That will take you to our page where you'll be able to do that. You can get us on Twitter, but I don't think either of us are checking that anymore. So it's at Dan Doolan, at C Billingham, 2 M's, and then at Nothing But Static without the G. Good luck. We might see it, we might not.
Although this goes out in February, so you never know. The situation might have changed by then, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'll be honest with you, I stopped and I've not really missed it, so...
No, well, that's true. Yeah, same.
Occasionally, I've opened up my phone and, habitually clicked on it and, just scrolled for a minute and then gone, oh, yeah, I don't care about this. And I've cut off. So, yeah, you're welcome to. I still might see the replies. Even if I'm doing that once every 2 weeks, I'll see my notifications and, glance through anything that's been sent at me. But as I'm now not tweeting... I'm not getting a lot of replies either, so, you're more likely to actually be seen now when you send us a message, because there won't be a huge list of messages, because it used to be that, I'd tweet something, and I'd get, the response to the tweet I'd put out, which meant anyone looking to contact us specifically about the podcast might get lost in the shuffle of replies to a tweet I'd sent. So, I guess you're more likely for me to spot you now, just... not straight away. But anyway, yeah, feel free. Obviously, go support Raphodraws, Instagram.com/RAPHO draws, DRAWS. Christ. I am not well. You can also get Raphodraws on Tumblr and Twitter and YouTube. Go to launchlinks.io/Raphodraws. I'll say that again. Launchlinks.io/u/Raphodraws to get links to all of Rapho's other stuff. If you're wondering who the hell is this Rapho and what do they draw? Well, they drew the big piece of art that we use as the key art for this podcast, Appa and the gang at sunset. If you like that piece of art, you want it on a mug or a t-shirt, or you want to see some other awesome art by that same artist, please do go support Rapho, who's amazing.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
So, I think... unless I'm absolutely off my bloody head on painkillers, Chris. I think that's everything.
I think that's it. I think we're ready, man.
Perfect. So that's been everything for this week. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And come back next week when we sit down to review The Voice in the Night.